Hello, in today's video we're going to show you how you can paint or do a sketch outdoors that would be suitable for a larger painting, perhaps back at the studio. We're going to go up into the South Wales valleys on a mountain view, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some tips and guidance on the way during the demonstration. The aim for today is to show you how to create a good composition and also how to mix some paints. So there'll be plenty of tips and guidance for you if you've not done it before. So if you fancy it, just join me and have a go yourself. Remember, the aim for today is to produce a sketch which would then be later used for a completed painting. It's a resource. You may sketch out in the spring, the summer and the autumn, but perhaps during the darker, rainier winter months, then you would use this resource for painting a full-blown landscape, maybe in oils, maybe in acrylics, which would take you a couple of weeks or possibly even months, with the time that it takes for them to dry in between, and then that would be put on display on a wall. Whereas a sketch generally stays in an artist's sketchbook and is used for references, possibly more than once. Could refer back to it a number of times. But what you're doing is you're actually observing at that moment in time, getting a feel for the atmosphere of the scene, and you're capturing that as opposed to any detailed work. Let's go. Okay, we've arrived here at the top of the mountain. Beautiful location, South Wales. It's not far from my home. A couple of, say, 15 minutes walk, carrying the gear. Quite uphill, very steep side of the valley. We have the sun just up above us, so a view over our shoulder. And we have kind of van quartering in the background here, which is where we're probably going to do our painting from. So let's not hang about and let's get on with our painting. Composition sounds more complicated than it actually is. What it means is looking at a scene and arranging the objects that you want so that you can create an interesting flow throughout a painting or a sketch. You're looking at the main details, picking them out for your focus, and then thinking about how your other main features fit in to that overall picture, and if there is a balance there. So it's really about picking out your focus and thinking about the basic forms of your image that you want to create. If you put a good balance in and things are the right size compared to each other and in the right places, then hopefully you should be able to create a good composition. In the distant area, which is the furthest distant area, the sky, which is the real background, the mountains are going to be my focus, and I may slightly move them or squash them up a little bit just so that I can get them in to create a interesting mountain area for the background. In my mid-ground area, that's in the central part of the painting, or perhaps a third down, I am looking for a focus of interest. I have quite a lot of trees and forest area here, and I've decided that I'm going to use the pine forest as my focus and my main feature there at that mid-ground area. In the foreground, we obviously have the reeds, they're a lovely colour, and we also have a little zigzag sheep track that the sheep use to walk across the mountains and follow each other. And this is a perfect little snake in S, which can lead our eye into the mountain focus in the far distance, which will help the painting all sit together nicely and help the viewer to travel through the painting, which hopefully will create a nice composition. And perfect timing, right on cue, here come the sheep to use the sheep track. I think they're used to see me here now anyway, so they're not too perturbed, but obviously they weren't expecting me here. It's always nice, but we won't be putting the sheep in today because I don't want to make the scene more difficult, especially for those who are just beginning to paint outdoors. So we can tackle animals in another session. I'm using a ballpoint pen here because I forgot my ink pen that I normally use, and if I'd used a pencil you wouldn't have been able to see it, especially with the reflection of the light coming from the right hand side over my shoulder, so ballpoint pen will do just as well. Okay, well that's the composition discussed, and we're just going to have a little last look at the scene before we start painting. If we take a closer look at the outline sketch, you will see that it's a very rough suggestion of the main features. It's a selection of dashes, lines, dots and zigzags, just creating that area that you know that you're going to place your objects, and you can check out the composition at the same time. Obviously there's no going back with a ballpoint pen, but there's nothing to stop you from painting it over if you're not happy with it. I'm using a wet in wet technique. It's so called because you wet the paper first, which is your first bit of wet, and then you put wet paint into the wet water. And what happens is the paint pigment bleeds down as the water absorbs into the paper, and this creates a softer diffused edge, which is quite important to keep if you're painting things that should be in the distance. As you know, things get a little bit more diffused by atmospherics the further they are away from the viewer, and we have to use techniques to help create the illusion of distance. So having soft edges is a very good technique, using wet and wet to create that illusion of distance. Don't worry about runs, they will happen. Deal with them as soon as you can so that you don't get a hard line in your sketch. Just get a little bit of tissue, it could be a little bit wet, and just mop up rips as they occur. But it's not the end of the world, you can actually get them out with a little bit of effort. Turning your paper upside down can help if you want to control the flow of the water and the paint. I don't want the whole sky all one dark colour. I want it to gradually lighten as it goes towards the mountains. This helps create perspective within the sky. Here I'm adding a weak solution of burnt umber. This will help put a little bit of warmth in the base of the clouds. I'm not going to put a lot of clouds in, just a suggestion, but if you have a variation of colour in the sky, it all adds to the interest rather than being just one colour. Something you have to take into consideration when you're using watercolours is the weather conditions and the environment. If it's windy, as you can hear it is here today, and also we have the sunshine, what you find is that the water dries very quickly and the paints dry very quickly, and sometimes you want your paints to run a little bit. So the addition of water is very important, and how you control it can be quite tricky. The reason why I would turn my paper upside down to do the pine forests is that it's far easier to draw a paintbrush down than it is to push a paintbrush up. As you draw the liquid down, you can come to a fine point as you take your brush off the paper. If you draw the paintbrush up, for some reason it drags more, and therefore makes it much more tricky to get that sort of fine point edge that you're looking for along the edge of a pine tree forest. It's important to be able to mix your colours and to know that yellow and blue makes green, and red and blue makes purple, and so forth, which most people learn very early on in their lives, and that's a good basis for mixing colours. However, when you're working in watercolours, it's a good idea to not mix one solid colour for an area, but to mix a combination of colours. So use your palette. The colours are a bit different. You've got a huge variety of each blue, a huge variety of each yellow. Some are warm and some are cold. The key is to dip in and have a little bit of everything and mix. Start off with the lightest colour and add a teeny bit of your darkest colour. So for instance, if you want a green, instead of picking a green from your palette, pick some yellow, a nice bright yellow, and add a small drop of a blue to it. And you should be able to get a green, but it'll be very yellowy green. Then maybe add a little bit more blue, and then another bit more blue. So you've always got 3 different types of green on your palette, and then you pick up a little bit of those and pop them into the area that you want to look green, but it'll have a variety of greens in, especially when you're looking at foliage and forest and in nature. Everything changes colour as it dies off, and it's a good idea to show that by colour mixing actually on the paper as opposed to on the palette. Here I'm adding mainly yellow ochre with a little touch of alizarin crimson, just for a change of coloration in the mid-ground. I'm having to be quite careful here because I do want to keep some of the white sharp areas of the reeds that are in the front to shine through the middle ground. So I'm having to work around them, and that's why I'm doing it upside down, but I will turn it around again soon. I have to remember at this point that the sun is coming out from the right hand side, so therefore any shadows on the mountains or on the landscape will be on the left hand side. So it's very important to keep that in mind when you're using your colours, that you think about shadowed areas, which obviously are going to be a little bit darker. At this point I want to get a feel for the lie of the land, especially in the middle ground. I've left it blank for a while. I had to carefully think about what I wanted to do. It's important to think about the different layers as you progress into the distance. You want to create that feeling of distance. So as we did with the sky, it's important to do a similar sort of thing with the land. Obviously you've got lots of lumps and bumps of the way the land falls over a distance, and the uneven ground. You need to show how that portrays and try and create the illusion of that sort of rugged terrain. I stopped here for a quick drink. It's obviously important to keep yourself hydrated if you're out working in the sunshine. Also, it gives a good chance for the paint to dry. It does dry a lot lighter than it is when you put the paint on the paper, so it's always a good chance to reassess the colour values and the tones. And also it gives you a chance to step back from the sketch and see where you're going to go next with it, and make your decisions about what you want to do. if you get a little solid blob of paint on your painting, it's best to just leave it there. Same if you have a hair, a bristle from your brush, or an insect that lands on your painting. Especially while it's wet, it's best to just leave it there and then remove it when it's dry. If you try to remove it when it's wet, then you spoil the work that you're trying to work on at that time. So leave it dry and then it'll just brush off easily and won't create any problems for you. You may notice that as we come through the midground that my colours are getting stronger. They have more strength of tone. They appear brighter and sometimes darker. And these are the same colours that I've been using all along, but I've been using less water in the mixture. And therefore you can add stronger colours and stronger strength of tone, which is what will appear in the foreground and slowly develop through the midground. I'm sorry about the noise of the wind. It creates a lot of problems in terms of audio. However, it's good for the atmospherics of painting outdoors. I'm using some yellow ochre and burnt umber and a bit of cerulean blue here. I'm not using so much water, even though I have wet the paper first. I want a stronger strength of colour, therefore I use less water in my mix. And because it's in the foreground, it's going to appear much more vivid. And it's upside down because I want to drag some of those really sharp lines, bring them to a sharp point for the reeds in the foreground. And sometimes I'll use the back of the brush and scratch into the area, and sometimes I'll use little splats of paint just to suggest a bit of life and action that's going in amongst the reeds. You might get mosquitoes, you might get flies, often you have little areas that blow around, and all that adds activity into the painting. Splattering the paint is a little bit more messy, however it's quite effective, especially for outdoor paintings. It's a way of holding the brush against your finger and then just bringing your finger sharply across the bristles, which allows the paint to splatter, and it just creates a little bit more vibrancy into a painting. Again, I've let the painting dry and come back to reassess the colours and tones of the overall sketch. I feel that the mid-ground is a little bit pale in comparison to obviously the more vivid foreground. So I want a happy medium in the middle of the painting between the paleness of the distant mountains and the strong colours of the foreground. So the mid-ground really needs to be a little bit stronger. So at this point I will say, okay, I'm going to have to put a little bit more colour into the middle ground just to help the tone even out throughout the work. I'm coming to the end of the work now. The painting is more or less finished. I'm just wetting around the edges. I'm going to be adding a wash of a dark tone just to help lead the eye into the centre of the painting and through the scene. And it's a good way of creating the illusion, like looking through a letterbox. You ignore the bits around the sides and you focus in on the bits in the middle. And using a dark wash along the tops and around the edges can help in this effect. enjoyed it, please subscribe, or just leave a comment, or just click on the next video if it was something that you enjoyed, but have a go yourself. That's the important thing. Thanks for spending time with me. Bye.